Have you ever stopped to think about what happens when the one thing you trust most, your own brain, starts to lie to you? That's what we're diving into today. Those rare and, frankly, unsettling moments when our perception of reality just completely breaks. I mean, really think about those questions. Can a piece of art literally make you pass out? And what would you do if you looked at your own mother and were convinced, deep in your soul, that she was a fake? It sounds like science fiction, right? But believe it or not, this stuff is real. These are actual psychological conditions, and they show us just how fragile our grip on reality can be. So let's get into it.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with what I'm calling glitches in perception. Then we'll pivot to situations where it's all about an overload of emotion. And to wrap things up, we'll look at how people can navigate this incredible maze that is the human mind.
Okay, let's kick things off with our first section. This is all about those moments when the wires in our brain get a little crossed. You know, when what we're seeing doesn't quite match up with what we're feeling. And trust me, it can create a reality that is just deeply, deeply strange.
So let's start with this. I want you to imagine looking at someone you love more than anyone, your spouse, your parent, your child. You see them, they look exactly right. But deep down, you're absolutely convinced they're a fake, an imposter, an identical double. That terrifying experience, that is the world for someone with a condition called Capgras syndrome.
So, what's really going on here? This is the wild part. The brain's facial recognition system, it's working perfectly. It sees the face and says, yep, that's them. But the problem, as neuroscientists think, is that the wire connecting that recognition part of the brain to the emotional part has been cut. So you get the visual match, but none of the warm, fuzzy feeling of familiarity that's supposed to come with it. All that's left is this cold, chilling logic that says, if they look right but don't feel right, they must be an imposter. It's an absolutely terrifying disconnect.
Okay, now let's switch gears to a totally different kind of perceptual glitch. This one was actually first written about way back in 1817 by a French author named Stendhal. It's called Stendhal syndrome, and it's what happens when beauty is just too much to handle, literally.
So get this. People with this syndrome can be looking at a beautiful painting or sculpture, and suddenly their heart starts racing, they get dizzy, they start sweating, some even pass out. It's a real physical reaction. And fun fact, it's been reported most often in Florence, Italy, which kind of makes sense, right? This city is just packed with some of the most stunning art in the world. So what in the world is causing this? Well, the thinking is that the emotional centers in the brain are just so overstimulated by all that beauty that they basically short circuit. They go into total overdrive, which then triggers the nervous system to have this massive physical reaction. And what's so fascinating when you put these two side by side is how they're both glitches in perception, but they're polar opposites. With Capgras, you have this emotional disconnect. A familiar face feels totally wrong. But with Stendhal, it's an emotional overload. An object of beauty feels way too real, to the point of being physically overwhelming. That idea of emotional overload is actually a perfect bridge to our next section, because now we're shifting focus from glitches in how we see the outside world to overwhelming emotions on the inside that can completely take control and reshape everything. And we're going to start with hematopia. Now, we're not just talking about being a little squeamish at the sight of blood. No, this is on a whole other level. It's an intense, all-consuming, and totally irrational fear of blood that can just take over your entire being. The trigger can be literally anything: seeing blood on TV, hearing someone talk about it, even just the thought of it popping into your head. And bam, it launches this huge wave of panic and anxiety with some pretty dramatic physical symptoms. It's basically your body's fight or flight system kicking into high gear over a threat that isn't really there.
So you might be wondering, where does a fear this powerful even come from? Well, it could be a few things. Maybe it's linked to a trauma from the past. Or it could be a learned behavior, like you saw your parents freak out about blood, so you learned to do it too. And sometimes it might even be a genetic thing, just a predisposition to anxiety. Okay, now let's talk about a condition that millions of people experience: Major Depressive Disorder, or MDD. A key feature here is something called anhedonia, and it's a profound loss of interest or pleasure in all the things you used to love. And the symptoms just permeate every corner of life. It's so much more than just feeling sad. It's this crushing fatigue, finding it impossible to concentrate, feeling completely worthless, and in the most serious cases, it can include suicidal thoughts that push people into total isolation.
And as you can see here, MDD really isn't just one thing, is it? It's more like a storm that affects everything. It hits your mood, sure, but it also messes with your thinking, your physical health, and just your basic ability to get through the day. Okay, so we've looked at some pretty heavy, really challenging conditions. The big question is, what can be done? So for our final section, let's turn towards the positive, the paths that lead to management, support, and a sense of hope. And here's the really important part. Even though all these conditions seem so different on the surface, there's a common thread when it comes to managing them. It really comes down to the power of understanding the issue and using targeted therapy and support to help the brain kind of find its footing again. And of course, the approaches are tailored for each specific issue. For something like Stendhal syndrome, the fix can be pretty straightforward. Just rest, get some reassurance, and maybe leave the museum for a bit. For hematophobia and MDD, something called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is huge. It helps people literally rewire their thought patterns. And for Capgras, it's often a combination of medication and psychological support to help make life more manageable. You know, this quote really sums it all up, doesn't it? Our sense of reality isn't this perfect, clear window looking out at the world. It's something that's actively being built moment by moment inside our heads. And sometimes that construction can be a little fragile. So from the face of a loved one to a piece of art to even just a simple thought, our brains are working 24/7, interpreting everything. And what these conditions show us in really profound ways is what can happen when that incredibly complex interpretation process goes just a little bit haywire. And so that really leaves us with one last big question to think about. When we study these rare glimpses into the brain's faulty wiring, these moments when the mind gets it wrong, what does that teach us about what it means to be human? What does it tell us about the delicate, amazing, and sometimes mystifying nature of our own consciousness?